Welcome back to the debrief. We turn now to a big weekend of activities in Washington, D.C., sponsored by the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. It's called the Annual Legislative Conference, and it's hundreds of issue forums and panel discussions being led by a who's who in the black community. Everything from how to defend attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, to artificial intelligence, ending with both President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris speaking at an awards dinner Saturday night. So here to shed more light on what this event is about is political analyst and strategist Calvin Dark. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us, Calvin. So for those of us who are not that familiar, what is this legislative conference all about?
Hey, good evening. Good to be here. The annual legislative conference of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, what some in Washington, D.C. refer to as CBC Week, is an opportunity for African-American leaders who are in Washington to meet with Washington leaders, but also leaders from communities and states around the country to tackle a wide range of issues, as you mentioned, so that they can propose solutions to lawmakers in Washington, but also to take them back home to the communities around the country that need them. And we see that as we approach next year, an election year, there are a lot of important issues that are important to African-American communities around the country. And so this annual legislative conference will be packed with not only just events, but a wide range of subjects.
So I named a couple, and you said there's a wide range of subjects, but what do you really see are the big issues to be discussed this year, especially ahead of this big election year next year?
Well, I think that one of the main focuses is going to be protecting democracy. That's one of the themes of the legislative conference, and we know that that is a very important issue for the upcoming elections. At the federal level, of course, with election denial being something that we're dealing with in this country, but also protecting voters' rights. In several states around the country, we see that there are voting restrictions being put in place that negatively affect minority communities, particularly African Americans. I think that another focus will be the economic empowerment of African Americans in this country, not just increasing opportunities, which is needed, but making sure that some of the gains that we've seen, particularly for the protection and promotion of small businesses, becomes permanent and is not changed, for example, if there's a change in administration or a change in the leadership of Congress. And then I think the third thing that we're going to see a lot about this year is just the protection of African-American history and culture. We know that in several states around the country, there has been a pushback against teaching African Americans' role in American history, and that has overflowed into criticisms against diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we're going to hear a lot about that and what ways people in Washington and around the country have proposed to protect those gains and protect our culture and history.
So Calvin, how do we take what happens this weekend in D.C. and translate it into the real world? And is the ultimate goal really to get people enthusiastic and active and to the polls?
Yes, I think that the first goal is a lot of leaders are going to be coming to Washington who, are not senators and not members of Congress. They're maybe on their local school boards. They're maybe county commissioners. These folks are coming to Washington to make sure their voices are heard, but to also bring back potential solutions. So there's going to be a lot of information sharing. And then I think when it comes to the 2024 election, we're going to have current leaders, namely President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. They're going to have to make their case. They're going to have to explain what they've done in this first term that tracks with the promises they made, how they fell short, and how a second term in a re-election would allow them to attack those promises and those goals more effectively. So I think that's what we're going to see over the coming week. And of course, there is a celebration of the 50th anniversary of hip hop. So we will see some stars and celebrities from the entertainment world as well as policy leaders.
I love all of these celebrations of that 50th anniversary. You mentioned that the president and vice president need to make their case really to voters. With them attending this weekend, obviously they see this as a very important event. So how crucial is this voting bloc to the Biden administration and staying in office?
It's very critical, and we see that African Americans have been extremely influential on the national and state level. Georgia is a great example of how African Americans really helped change the course of our recent elections. But I think what's going to be a challenge for President Biden and Vice President Harris is to make that case clearly and not take the African American vote for granted. African Americans have a lot of issues, from gun violence to protecting democracy to protecting history, and they're going to be looking for their leaders from the White House down to the local city, county commissioners boards to see which party and which candidates best represent their interests. And so we'll see if our leaders, starting with Biden and Harris, will make that argument effectively.
Political analyst and strategist Calvin Jark, thank you so much for your time all the way from Cairo, Egypt tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.